Chris Burns, financial advisor, certified retirement counselor. Joining me today is financial advisor Alex Astin, also a certified estate planner.
That's right.
And so what we are planning to talk about today, and we see it in the retirement space, is living too long. That's a goal of some people, right?
Yeah, it should be a good problem.
It should be a good problem. But what's one of the really big things that jump out that we see when it comes to income planning? Because income planning 10, 15 years ago, maybe you were planning for a little bit less time in that retirement space. So what are you seeing?
I mean, the biggest problem is inflation. I mean, inflation affects everybody.
Yeah.
So inflation is the number one factor that, do I have enough money to retire? You never know when you're to pass away, right? So you got to presume, at least if you're married, one of you lives till 90.
Right.
So inflation is going to eat away at that retirement. The coffee can method, putting that money out in the backyard, not necessarily the best strategy anymore. Because if inflation is growing at, say, 3 or 4%, and that money is growing at 0, you're losing money.
That's right.
So the challenges for most retirees is being able to fit their risk tolerance into their portfolio.
Absolutely. And when it talks about that inflation risk, as you're talking about, is that coffee can analogy is a great example, because the value of a $100 bill in the year 2000 was obviously worth $100, right? If you stuck it in that coffee can and you dug that coffee can back up in 2022, that buying power is now around $54, right? And since COVID, have we put more money in the market or less money when it comes to it? We've added over $10 trillion in new money. Yep. So what do we anticipate inflation is going to look like over the next 5, 10, 15, even 30 years? We think it's going to continue to go up, right? So you need investments to be able to keep pace with inflation, right? We sit down with very few people and say, hey, help us figure out how to take care of the first 10 years of retirement. It's those last 10 years of retirement, because I say the same thing at every workshop. I said, look to your left, look to your right. Statistically speaking, one spouse should see age 90. And you guys can argue over who that's going to be, but someone's going to be there. But if we anticipate one spouse to be to make it all the way to age 90, what's a concern that they could run into?
Well, you also got to look at what your income streams are. Typically, for everybody, that's usually Social Security. Well, what happens when one of you passes away? You lose a Social Security. If you're counting on that Social Security until you pass away, great, that's fantastic. But when somebody does pass, you will lose one. Now, the surviving spouse will step into larger Social Security, but you do lose the payment that you were used to. Another reason that you look at that is, well, you were married. You've been married probably for a long time. What happens when one of you passes away? You go to a single tax bracket versus a married tax bracket. Those deductions get a little bit lower. Your tax brackets, they get a little bit smaller, right? And you just end up paying typically more in taxes.
So if you want the same amount of income in retirement, going from a joint bracket to a single bracket, it just got more expensive is what you're telling me.
Exactly. And most people don't plan for that. A lot of people, the biggest problem that they have is they have their income now. They have their fixed income now. But what they don't account for even a lot of times is unexpected expenses. Medical bills, right? That's often what we see as clients age. These things happen, right? A long-term care stay can be $5,000 to $10,000 a month, depending on where you're staying, the level of care that you're getting. And most of the time, right, aging parents, right, children that have to take care of their aging parents, want to put them in good facilities, want them to be taken care of. If you don't plan very well, that facility may not be, ideally where they want to be and live comfortably. And so too often we look at what are ways that we can help with those strategies. Well, we're not big fans of use it or lose it, right? If you put money into something like a long-term care policy and you don't use it, well, great. The goal was is you didn't have to use it. You lived. You did great.
But you passed in your sleep. You didn't receive $1 out of it. Paid premiums for maybe a couple decades.
Right. And so we typically look for strategies where we can use maybe riders, maybe something attached to certain policies to where it's there if you need it. But if you don't, great. Now you've got certain ways to spend that money in the side of those policies versus money just being spent away. And ideally, you don't ever want to have to use it.
Right.
But that's the way we would prefer to use those types of strategies.
And it makes sense to run, some long-term income plans, because it's not if but when you make it to that age, right? You need to go ahead and have that plan in place, right? So if we say, hey, we have $10,000 a month coming in from income and we're spending $5,000 a month, I feel pretty good about that.
Yep.
Well, depending on how you have your investments, if they're not keeping pace with inflation, that $100 bill story that we just told comes right back to get you. And then it's probably going to happen later on in life. You lose a spouse, you go from single bracket, it's much easier to go back to work within the first few years of retirement. With being retired 10, 15 plus years, a little bit harder.
Yeah.
You mentioned having $200,000 to $300,000, set aside for healthcare expenses, right? That's just the healthcare side. Well, if you're going to be retired for 20, 30 years, other things are going to come up.
Yeah.
A vehicle going to last you the next 20, 30 years, right? The insurance company lets you keep a roof and not have to replace a roof during that time frame. So these are anticipated needs coming up that we can forecast, saying, hey, look, in 10 years, we're going to need an extra $50,000 for a roof. Or, hey, every 7 years, we're going to need $30,000, $40,000 for a vehicle or something like that. These are things that we can build into the plan. And what I found, and I think you can comment on this too, is that taking care of some of those one-offs and showing that we're thinking about it, and it maybe doesn't happen in 5, 6, 7 years, but sooner or later it's going to happen. So making sure that you've got the portfolio already taken care of to be prepared for that is important. Unlike, oh, now what do we do, right?
Right.
You didn't pay me to react. You pay me for what I've done. So when it does happen, we've already got a plan of action in place.
Yeah, that phone call should never be, hey, what do we do? It's, all right, well, here's what we've already done. This is how we've set this up. This is how your portfolio, we want you to have a good understanding of your portfolio, the risk that it's taking, how we're setting it to battle inflation over the long-term period. And so that way it should never be reactionary. We always want to make sure that we've got something put together to where we understand the ups and downs can happen. We've got a plan in place to make sure that we can withstand all of those.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. What we want you to take away from this is that if you currently have a long-term care plan or you've got some things set aside for retirement, that's excellent. We're just saying we're seeing less of it. And so we want to make sure that you're maximizing your income today, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, and making sure that you've got your best investments taken care of, so that not if but when life throws you a curveball, we've already prepared for it.
That's right.
Excellent. Thank you for another episode of Coffee Chat. Look forward to doing this again with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.